There are hundreds of different ways to play Skyrim, with multiple YouTube channels much better than this one dedicated to showing you how it's done. I'm here to tell you, however, that they are all incorrect and there's only one way to do it right. With a shovel in one hand and a shovel in the other, an armor rating of 0 and a character that looks like the Dark Urge from Baldur's Gate 3, we set out into the brave new world and are immediately captured by the government for trying to cross the border illegally. It turns out the penalty for such a crime is death, so we're not off to a great start. Fortune does end up smiling upon us, however, as seconds before our head is set to meet the axe, a dragon swoops down out of nowhere and begins tearing the whole place up. We take this opportunity to slip away from the guards and head over to the keep, where we're faced with our first role-playing choice of the game. Do we leave with Ralof, one of the human rebels who is destined for the same chopping block that we were, or Hrothgar, a kind-hearted Imperial soldier who was guarding the convoy we rode in on? Now, I'll be honest, there are some things I would rather do less than side with the Imperials. For instance, ramming my dick down the business end of an industrial-grade ventilation unit. However, Skyrim is still at least 5 years away from that sort of temperature moderation technology, and, unfortunately for Hrothgar, there's no such apparatus in sight, so we end up going with Ralof. Once inside, we skip his dialogue by sprinting into him at full speed whenever he attempts to speak. This is a technique that also works in real life, by the way, to get to the end of his conversation chain where he cuts our bindings loose. Not long after we're free, a pair of Imperial soldiers enter the room and combat starts up. Ralof was probably expecting some help from his new Argonian companion. Unfortunately, this room was notably devoid of any gardening equipment, so we're currently unable to deal any damage. We do our best to help Ralof out and get in the way of the two Imperial soldiers, while we sit back and witness the unrepentant glory that is two Skyrim NPCs trying to hit one another. Once Ralof takes them down, we waste no time in stripping all their clothes off and making a mad dash for the exit. There are a few enemies scattered throughout the keep, but our lizard scales make us rather slippery, and it isn't long before we're on our way to the first town. We do this, of course, not to warn the town about a potential dragon attack, but instead to steal some metal from the local blacksmith and use it to craft ourselves a worthwhile weapon. The blacksmith is initially skeptical of our craftsmanship, but pretty soon we get it through his head. Now is the point in the video where a smart man would start exploiting the game, using questionable methods to enchant our shovel with unholy amounts of damage and one-shotting everything we come across. But after consulting with some experts, I've recently come to the realization that enchanting tables are not shovels, so we won't be using them. Other notable non-shovel items include potions, food, alchemy labs, spells of any kind, and armor. With our endgame gear having been acquired almost 15 minutes into the playthrough, we decide to set out on the first quest. The path to Whiterun proves more perilous than I personally predicted as we come across a pack of... Is there a way to say wolves that starts with a P? And a group of Imperial soldiers who, either because our writ of execution from Helgen is still valid, or because we're the prime suspect in a recent string of shovel-related homicides, decide to attack us on sight. This proves to be a poor decision on their end, but remarkably good news for the prisoner they were escorting. Surprisingly enough, when you live your life in a murderous haze, attacking everybody you come across, you end up running afoul of the law. We wake up in a Whiterun prison cell and have to resort to forbidden time-bending lizard magic to stare at a bed and skip all of our consecutive life sentences until the guards let us out, right in front of Dragon's Reach, which is the Jarl's palace and, conveniently, the place we need to go to further our quest. We head inside to speak to the Housecarl, who refers us to the Jarl, who refers us to the court wizard, who tells us to fuck off back to Riverwood and go grave robbing to try and find a tablet for him to do wizardly research on. We acquiesce, because at this point we're just happy nobody's noticed that we've only spent about 17 minutes in prison for murdering 4 civilians and 3 soldiers despite having only been in the hold of Whiterun for about a day. The particular grave we've been directed to rob lies in Bleak Falls Barrow, a Nordic burial crypt that sits on a mountain just north of Riverwood. We reach the entry point no problem and clear out a few low-level bandits before fighting the first mini-boss, and Jesus fucking Christ, what the hell is that? My adrenaline spikes to levels commonly found in the Black Rhinoceros as I mash left-click like my bloodline depends on it. Unfortunately, my battle trance hadn't quite worn off at the end of the fight, and I end up shattering the spine of one of the prisoners the spider had tied up while I was trying to cut him down. This turn of events ends up being a good thing, however, as he had on him some good loot, most notably the key to unlocking the inner sanctum of Bleak Falls Barrow. I mean, it didn't turn out to be a good thing for him, but come on guys, he's an elf. The rest of Bleak Falls Barrow is pretty linear. We wade our way through winding catacombs, brutalizing undead skeletons as they attempt to get out of their crypts and draw their weapons to attack us, and eventually find ourselves face to face with the puzzle door at the end of the crypts. Fortunately for us, Skyrim isn't known for its difficult puzzles, and anybody with the intellectual capacity equal to that of your average bovine could probably get this door open. That includes us. The door gives way to the interior crypts, which we enter, before heading up to the word wall and absorbing some sort of mysterious power from it. We turn around just in time to see the final boss of the dungeon crawling out of his coffin and getting absolutely fucking buried within seconds. Fortunately for us, Skyrim isn't known for its difficult combat. Now that I think of it, what is this game known for? Oh, right. Mods. We take the Dragonstone to the court wizard, that's got a rank in the top 5 for nerdiest things I've ever said, and ask him for a reward. He tells us to go bother the Jarl instead, which we do, and in turn he gives us a leather helmet that we can't use because it's not a shovel, and tells us to go kill a dragon. As exciting as the prospect of lizard-on-lizard violence may be, we spend most of the fight doing our best Donkey Kong impression while we wait for the dragon to land. Once it does, we waste no time in establishing ourselves as the dominant reptile in the ecosystem and battering it to death with the end of our shovel. As it dies, we appear to absorb its soul. This frightens some of the men nearby who take to calling us Dragonborn. This isn't news to us, but they seem pretty excited about it and tell us to go inform the Jarl. On our way back, we cross paths with the sponsor of today's video, Hrothgar. He's either the local priest or the town schizophrenic, and he blurs the lines as hard as he possibly can.
Walk among the stars!
I spent over 24 hours observing him, and this is what I've come to learn about his behavioral patterns. He wakes up at 8 a.m. and heads to the statue in the center of town, where he will spend 12 hours hollering madness at anybody who passes by. Rather, I should say in spite of who passes by, as he kept going even after I passed my stealth check and as far as he was concerned there was nobody around. When he decides he's finished for the day, he walks about 15 feet back to his house, which contains an abnormal number of human skulls. In the interest of clarity, while most mentally sane people would consider any number greater than 0 to be an abnormal number of human skulls to have in one's possession, Hrothgar has 3. At least, that I counted. I don't dare enter his bedroom. Thank you for your sponsorship, Hrothgar. Now back to the video. We make our way back to the palace and regale the Jarl with the events that took place before he too proclaims us Dragonborn. We know. And tells us that our most logical course of action going forward would be to climb the tallest mountain in existence, obviously, to speak to the 4 reclusive hermits who live in a monastery at the top. Before we leave, he proclaims us Thane of the City, a title that confers righteous nobility and an adherence to the values of the people. Naturally, our first act as Thane is to steal some bitch-ass peasant's horse and ride off towards our destination. Mounted shovel-based combat proves to be rather difficult, so we opt to take most fights on 2 feet alongside our noble companion. We ascend the mountain together, taking our time to fuck up the wildlife on the way before we encounter the frost troll. Not a frost troll, the frost troll. If you've played Skyrim for any amount of time, you know what I'm talking about. This guy hands out more free meals than a goddamn soup kitchen. We learn his attack patterns quickly enough and start backstepping his cosmic haymakers before finishing him off with a series of quick counterattacks. The rest of the journey is uneventful and we eventually reach the monastery. Once inside, we yell at some old men who recognize us as Dragonborn and offer to help us learn more about our draconic gifts as long as we pass their frat club level hazing initiation ritual. They ask that we steal a relic from the tomb of their organization's long-dead founder, which is located northeast of the city of Morthal. For those of you that don't know, that's basically the Skyrim equivalent of Wyoming. We arrive there early the next morning, and there is predictably fuck all going on, so we embrace our reptilian nature and wade through the swamp towards the quest marker. As we breach the inside of our destination, we come across a group of rather entrepreneurial necromancers using some of the corpses inside the tomb to serve as free labor in their makeshift mining operation. Naturally, the corpses don't take too kindly to this and stage a rebellion, which serves as a perfect distraction for us to sneak in and split the remaining necromancers in half. There's a pun in here somewhere about shovels, grave digging, and necromancy that a smarter man would have found, but I spent about 30 minutes looking for it and couldn't come up with anything, so you'll have to make do with this meta-acknowledgement of my wits failing, and this picture of an elephant sucking its own dick. We tear through the remainder of the dungeon with relative ease, killing a few zombies, a few skeletons, and coming face to face with yet another arachnid that is entirely too large to exist and could very well be the face of its own 7-part horror franchise. When we do reach the end of the dungeon, we find that the relic we're looking for has already been taken and replaced with a note from a mysterious stranger asking us to meet them at the Riverwood Inn. Once we arrive, we meet Delphine, the personified concept of pestilence thrown into the main plot and flagged essential as God's way of punishing me for my hubris. She leads us down into her pretentious and unnecessary hidden lair and spews nonsense in the form of dialogue that I skip as fast as possible because every second I spend listening to this woman talk takes about 6 years off my life. For the sake of the viewer, I'll summarize the cliff notes here. Number 1, she is perhaps the only person in Skyrim who does not believe we are Dragonborn, and number 2, she'd like us to prove to her that we are Dragonborn by tagging along with her and killing a dragon. Now, if you think about this plan for about 2 seconds, you come to realize that she's kind of an idiot, because there are only 2... Hey everybody, Editing Liam here from the future, just letting you know that the previous lines of dialogue you heard were just the beginning of a 3-minute and 36-second unscripted rant about how much of an idiot I think Delphine is, and while I stand by the points I made, I don't have that kind of runtime, so going forward, just assume that, unless otherwise indicated, I find listening to Delphine about as pleasurable as shoving thumbtacks in my ears, and we're going to continue with the video. Delphine's plan seems about as likely to go well for us as shooting up arsenic, however the quest marker gives us no alternatives, so it's off we go. Once we reach the location where the dragon slaying is set to take place, we're treated to an interesting sight. The large dragon that saved us from execution at the beginning of the game is using shout magic to resurrect his long-dead ally. They look like they were about to have a conversation, and I think they expected us to wait for them to be finished before engaging them in combat. However, if I learned anything from playing Call of Duty back in 2013, it was... slurs. But if I learned anything else, it was that spawn camping is usually the most effective way to put someone down. The dragon dies and we absorb his soul just as we did the last time. If you're wondering where his buddy went, me too. He just kind of flew off. With that, Delphine finally comes around and lets us in on the next step of her plan. She intends to go after a group known as the Thalmor, as she believes they are the ones behind the dragons returning. Wait a minute, who are the Thalmor? Excellent question. They're a group of douchebag elves who claim to rule over Skyrim. They don't have anything to do with the dragons coming back. We already know who's responsible for that, we just watched him resurrect one. But Delphine hates them, and this, combined with her possessing the logical reasoning skills of a tardigrade, have led her to believe it's them. She proposes we meet up with a contact of hers who is currently operating as a spy inside the Thalmor embassy. He's able to smuggle some equipment in for us and pass it off to us once we're inside. As for gaining entry, Delphine has managed to secure us an invitation to one of the Thalmor's upcoming parties, so we'll pose as a potential political associate before sneaking away and stealing the Thalmor's sensitive intelligence. I'm not sure what any of this has to do with dragons, but I am as my gene father made me, and when the opportunity to slaughter a group of elves presents itself, I seldom turn it down. Once we arrive at the party, we forego mingling in favor of manipulating an alcoholic into calling the hostess an ugly whore. This draws the group's attention and affords us an opportunity to slip away without anybody noticing. We grab the shovel that was smuggled in for us before the drug dealer operating out of the kitchens threatens to snitch on us. We dissuade her from this course of action by wrapping our weapon around her neck and bludgeoning her to death with our forehead. From there, we complete the 20-minute stealth mission in 90 seconds by slaughtering every elf between us and the intelligence that they're guarding. Turns out, they don't know shit about dragons, who would have guessed, and are instead spending most of their time looking for a homeless man living in the sewers. We take this information back to Delphine, who acts like it was part of her plan all along and tells us to go collect the guy because he might know something about the dragons. Seeing her face again puts me on the verge of an actual psychotic episode, which is bad news for this guard who decided now was the best time to ask me to pay taxes. We head down into the sewers and fight our way past the leagues of Thalmor agents between us and our target. His name is Esbern, by the way. He's an old man who lives in the sewer eating rats and talking to human skulls, but he seems to know a lot about dragon lore, so we escort him back to Delphine. Try as they might, the Thalmor aren't able to stop us. They even go as far as to send a Khajiit assassin to try and kill us before we leave town, but she's pretty shit at her job. It takes Esbern about 2 conversations to eclipse Delphine in terms of usefulness and plot relevance, as he's aware of a place called Skyhaven Temple where ancient warriors recorded the prophecy of the return of the dragons and their eventual defeat at the hand of the last Dragonborn. The journey to Skyhaven Temple is somewhat perilous, as the dragons seem to have caught wind of our scheme, and the locals nearby are just kind of assholes and try to kill us for no reason. We clear the place out with relative ease before dying to a puzzle trap made for 12-year-olds and having to do it all again. This time we make sure to put our thinking caps on and arrive at Skyhaven Temple unscathed. Once we enter, Delphine makes sure to justify my endless disdain for her by refusing to walk forward and breaking the scripting of the cutscene that was supposed to play out, forcing yet another reload. Once we finally do get it working, Esbern walks us up to this stone tapestry and starts monologuing for about 5 minutes, which I will summarize for you here. The ancient warriors defeated the dragons by ripping their king, Alduin, from the sky, he's the one we saw earlier resurrecting the other dragons, by using a special shout. We don't know this shout, so we go ask the Greybeards, who don't know this shout, so they tell us to go ask their boss, Parthenax. Turns out Parthenax is so good at dragon shouting because he himself is a dragon. We immediately feel a lizard-like kinship to our winged brethren, who's happy to help us right away. Unfortunately, even he doesn't know the shout we're after, and tells us we have to go find it by retrieving an Elder Scroll. Also, fun fact about this guy, he shares a voice actor with Mario.
Let's go!
I mean, yeah, I guess I can see it. After consulting with a group of nerds, we learn the location of an Elder Scroll, buried deep beneath a dwarven ruin. The dwarves of this setting have long since gone extinct, leaving their cities in the hands of their automatons, meth-addled cat people, and a group of blinded elves. I've gotta say, Skyrim does not do great in terms of Khajiit representation in its main storyline. This dungeon is an absolute slog. Some of the enemies have poison-tipped weapons, which are very effective against our unarmored body, but we eventually force our way through it and collect the Elder Scroll. We take it back to Papa Parthenax, who tells us to read it at the peak of his mountain before it flings us back in time to witness Alduin's defeat firsthand. The ancient warriors beam the knowledge of the shout directly into our mind, which is impeccably good timing considering Alduin shows up ready to limit test. If you were at all curious who had the advantage between an anthropomorphic lizard wielding Home Depot's finest and a draconic demigod who's older than time itself, the answer won't surprise you. He kicks our ass quite a few times, and even after we manage to defeat him, I wouldn't really call it a win. He uses a power to turn himself temporarily invulnerable while a shower of meteors rain from the sky. He takes this opportunity to monologue to us, setting up the final arc of the story, but I can't really pay attention to it because I'm too busy spazzing the fuck out trying to dodge all the meteors, because if one of these things hit me, I'm gonna die and have to do the fight all over again. Once Alduin finishes yapping, the meteors relent and he flies off. Parthenax congratulates us for a job well done, yeah sure thing man, don't mention it, before telling us we ought to capture and interrogate one of Alduin's allies to find out where he's run off to. He notes that the Jarl's Palace in Whiterun has previously been used in that regard, and may still be functional, so it's off to see the Jarl. He's not too happy about the whole thing, or maybe is just annoyed that we barged into his bedroom at 4 in the morning to ask him to do something completely insane. Either way, he says he won't help us unless we put a stop to the Civil War first. A task that's easier said than done for most people, however, as a psychotic, bloodthirsty lizard, we actually handle it pretty easily. We nominate one unfortunate Whiterun guard to be used as bait and sound the dinner bells. Sure enough, a dragon answers in no time. He doesn't put up too much of a fight, and we're able to spring the trap on him no problem. After some careful negotiation, and by that I mean spam-clicking the only dialogue option available to me, we manage to convince him to fly us to Alduin's hidden fortress and put a stop to this dragon conflict once and for all. As it turns out, Alduin has been hiding out in the afterlife, feasting on the souls of soldiers slain in the Civil War to regenerate his strength. The portal he uses to traverse between the two planes is at the end of a dungeon guarded by a bunch of Draugr, because of course it fucking is. We carve our way through the place, getting some very cathartic revenge against the frostbite spiders that have been haunting my nightmares since I began this playthrough, and eventually make our way to the portal, guarded by an ancient lich known as a dragon priest. These guys are pretty formidable in the lore, but they share a weakness with most mages, and that is that they have a hard time casting spells when you cave in their skull. We hop through and find ourselves in Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, face to face with Sun, Thane of Shore, one of the Nordic gods. He's metal as fuck and refuses to let us cross into the land of the dead until we beat his ass in single combat, which we almost don't do because he hits like an absolute truck and we're not wearing armor, but he takes it easy on us and spends most of the fight blocking while we wail on him. Speaking of whales, once the fight has concluded, we're granted passageway across the Whalebone Bridge into the Hall of the Dead. As somebody who knows nothing about Elder Scrolls lore, I'm choosing to believe that this whole thing was just a pun about dead whales often being found near the shore. Inside, we recruit a few fallen heroes to aid us in our dragon-slaying quest and head back out. While the Nords of Skyrim may place a high importance on courage and honor, our calculating reptilian brain comes up with a different strategy. We have a whale of a time hiding out by the bridge, using a natural outcropping to shield ourselves from the meteors Alduin calls down while our allies soak up the brunt of the damage. Then, like the hero we are, we come sprinting in for the final blow. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.